All right, fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for my session, the 1 o'clock hour. Hopefully, you guys aren't in food comas right now. It's tough enough to hold your attention virtually. So get up, stretch if you need to, but just crank up the volume. We'll get through this together. My talk today is, as you can see, titled Preparing for the CSWA Using xDesign. I've subtitled it A Viable Path Forward, a case study. I want to start by kind of walking you through why I'm doing this talk. After I show you a still photo of me, that's what I look like when I'm not moving. My name is Pedro. If you were at the opening session, we've already met, co-founder at Solid Professor, and let's get going. Oh, reminder, I know you've been in a lot of other sessions, so you've probably already got this down, but the Q&A, I'm definitely going to leave time at the end for some Q&A. I hope there are a lot of questions. I hope that if this subject and the title of the talk brought you here, that this is something that should raise a lot of questions. We've certainly had a lot here at Solid Professor, which is why I decided to do this talk. Just a couple words on the inspiration for the talk, very specifically. I shared some of this again in the opening remarks, but the idea that on March 13th, the world changed so drastically for us. We were in the middle of the spring term working with many of you, and suddenly we have the longest spring break ever launched upon us. Yeah, there was some remote learning. Our experience here, at least with our kids, is that it was remote learning mostly to check a box. It wasn't very rigorous. I definitely believe that this fall, it will be night and day different, but I mean, we were all caught so off guard. We did our best. When all of that happened, we did reach out to our community of instructors, of educators, teachers, and it was important for us to let everybody know that, this tool that our customers were using, that they had invested in, it's an online tool. It takes care of, distributing lessons, a mini curriculum, if you will, that you can put in front of your students. So we knew that the accessibility was not going to be a problem. But we still wanted to let everybody know that if they needed help for whatever other reason, that we were there to help. So we started that communication. We have a wonderful customer success team at Solid Professor. Many of you know them by name. They're fantastic people. And we just thought it was really important to reach out and create those connections, not knowing where we were going to end up. We also expanded our service. We made it easy for people to come onto our platform. We made it easy for lots of different people to join our platform at no cost or little cost, or we wanted to help, and that led to the question of what else can we do, and that's kind of what drove this idea that let's examine where we are. For us as an organization, we've been working with the education community for a long time. And if we take a quick snapshot, or just to get a sense for, who do we work with? Who do we serve? We serve educators. We serve educators K-12, post-secondary, technical schools, large numbers of schools and students. To give you an idea how heavily this skews towards SOLIDWORKS usage, that's a little metric I pulled from one of our dashboards here that shows you, for the 2019-2020 academic school year, the large portion on the right there indicates of that donut indicates the proportion of activity, lesson completions that occurred in our platform, and you can see that the nearest competitor is far less, a third of what SOLIDWORKS activity is. And so I wanted to share that with you because here I am giving this talk. I don't know if everybody knows this, so I'll say it out loud. Solid Professor, while we've been doing training with SOLIDWORKS for a very long time, we've been focused on SOLIDWORKS for a long time, and we have a great, fantastic relationship with SOLIDWORKS. We are unaffiliated with SOLIDWORKS. We obviously provide training for lots of other platforms and subject areas, but I wanted to say that because I need to explain why is it that I took the time to put this talk together and do the research that I did specifically for SOLIDWORKS. And this is the reason why, because when we spoke with our customers, they're asking questions very much about what are we going to do about our certification prep driven curriculum, and how are we going to maintain that? So that was a question that came up early on. Obviously, we didn't have answers immediately, so we started thinking about what we might do to get a little smarter about the subject. So in addition to coming up with what I think was a fantastic idea to have this event, we also came up with the idea of doing a little research and just getting smarter about some of these subjects so we could relay some information. So I'm not sure if this is technically true, but I feel like I was the very first speaker that committed to doing a talk at this event. I'm pretty sure it is because I was the first one that knew about it. So going from there, in speaking to all of you, this idea of this challenge, the big challenge that arose is, okay, we work with SolidWorks. We're all about this certification as the end goal for some of the reasons that were listed on the previous slide. Funding, very important, those outcomes, college readiness, all reasons why the certification component of the SolidWorks implementation into the classroom is so valuable. We ran into this, or we kept hearing that there was uncertainty about, okay, it's great that we have Solid Professor. You guys are making it very easy to access it remotely. Fantastic. How are the students supposed to follow along? How is this going to work? And so we didn't have answers. We reached out to our partners at SolidWorks trying to seek some answers. And I think together we just developed a better and better understanding of where are we going? Where are we headed? The key question that emerged, if I had to summarize it, is this. This was the sentiment. So how can we move forward with our CSWA-focused curriculum when students don't have access to SolidWorks? That became the driver for what I'm going to talk about today. And so I have here, again, with a question, Marceau, xDesign. In reaching out to SolidWorks, we connected to several of our great partners and just people that have been super supportive of us, just to try and get as much information as we could. We also obviously are tuned into, a lot of what the announcements that come out of the education community through Marie and other channels. And so we're always looking to see what's going on over there. And it was interesting for me pretty early on during this pandemic that we started seeing things like this notification here about the 3D Experience platform, which of course contains as one of its apps xDesign. It was being made available to students, and there were details about that. So what I learned about it, and I guess just to share with you, I want to find out if those that are in attendance, I've got a poll that I'm going to run. If you've been in a session with a poll, you probably know how this works better than I do. I just published it, so at some point you'll see it. You should be able to click and answer. What I want to know is how familiar are you with xDesign? And I just put a few options there that you can select, and I'll just let that run while we continue speaking. I don't think I have to do anything else there, so you can find it in the chat panel, top right side. It says polls. But what I knew about xDesign is that it is a web-based 3D modeler. Obviously, that's why it came up in the conversation about how are we going to solve this hardware issue, and the idea that students aren't going to be in the classroom in front of their computers or in their labs. So that's obviously very important. It has, it's from Dassault Systems. So as we'll get into later, there certainly are differences between SolidWorks and xDesign, but the idea that they come from kind of that same background and the same wonderful group of people over there, that there would be, maybe a reason to look into it for that reason. I mentioned it's part of the 3D Experience platform, which is, what drew my attention when I saw the article. And in that article, it explained that you would have the ability to get 1 year of access to the 3D Experience platform's academic platform with the purchase of the SolidWorks Student Edition. I initially read that, and there was a lot of information being thrown around the office, and all of us were sharing and trying to get as smart as possible to be able to answer your questions. I maybe initially misunderstood that. I wanted to add the last bullet point here, which is it doesn't mean that if you already have SolidWorks as a school that you necessarily have access to the 3D Experience platform. I'm not clear on that. I know that we have SolidWorks personnel, and they're obviously in the booth, so they can answer a lot of those types of questions. I just wanted to present this as kind of the starting point for what I knew about xDesign and where I was going from here. And obviously, it's not a lot of information. That's not enough to answer everyone's questions. Let me submit my answer to this poll so I can see some answers too. So from here, let's dive a little bit deeper into, okay, great. So in the results, it looks like 0% use it regularly, not unexpected. Some of you have tried it, seen it, but never used it, is a little higher than that, but the vast majority have not seen it in action. Well, we'll take a look here. I can answer any questions about that. I don't have time to go in and do a technical demo, nor am I the best qualified person to do that. I'm sure SolidWorks at their booth can help you with that. But suffice it to say, I will be able to answer many of the questions because kind of got my hands dirty with it as well along the way, which was really cool. Okay, so some additional information about xDesign. It's not a one-to-one replacement for SolidWorks. So let's just, it's not SolidWorks in the cloud. It's not that at all. It's not trying to be that. And that's kind of an important detail that, at least as a conclusion I've drawn. Again, from my external perspective, I don't represent, SolidWorks, and I certainly don't have inside information, but my observation is it's not trying to be SolidWorks. There were questions asked during earlier sessions about, when is xDesign going to get this feature or that feature? When's it going to do this? And I'm just not sure that that's what we're trying to do when we look at xDesign. So wanted to make that, at least my perspective on that, clear. So what functionality will you find? I put a little screenshot there of the command manager. It's got a different name in xDesign, but my assumption is that if you're here to talk about CSWA, you probably are familiar with SolidWorks, at least somewhat. So some of the terminology I'll use is probably SolidWorks terminology, but that's my frame of reference. I'll be using that throughout. But in the command manager, you can see, creating a model like what you see pictured there is no problem. Certainly extrudes, revolves, sweeps. I played around with a loft tool that's in there, which I actually did not expect to find, but there it was. And quite a few other things. The sketching environment fully supported, lots of similarities, as you'll see later, with SolidWorks and the way it functions. On the assembly side, it supports mates and the ability to put parts together, and mass properties as well. I focus on those things because, as you'll see in a second, we're going to take a look at these features side by side with the requirements of the CSWA. We're going to try and find where the parallels are, where the disconnects might be, and then delve into those. Importantly, the last bullet point here, the last portion, it does not have a 2D drawing creation component. And again, I would categorize this as something that it's not incomplete. It's not, as far as I know, it's not something that's in the queue waiting to be released into xDesign. If you've been in a 3D experience platform, and I must admit that only recently have I been in there a bit, its ecosystem is really driven by these discrete apps. And there's, I think, a lot of interplay between them that makes them, really powerful. But don't expect all of them to get into, some behemoth, Voltron type of everything assembled in one place. That's just not, I think, the way it's going. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the CSWA. I wanted to look at the CSWA requirements as I understand them and as I've gleaned them from the SolidWorks website, but also having gone through it myself, as you'll see in a second, with some test subjects. I feel like I know it pretty well right now. And so I wanted to kind of just walk through what is a CSWA from a requirements perspective. Important to note that it's an associate level certification. And the reason for the graphic here is to let you know that we are talking about a limited scope of functionality with relation to the rest of the certification ecosystem, right? So the associate level is the far left-hand side. From there, you progress on through to the professional level, all the way to the expert level on the extreme right side of that diagram. So already, regardless of what xDesign offers us in terms of functionality, we're not placing the demands of an expert level certification on the xDesign platform. There's some distance between there, which for my initial overview here, it allows me to continue pulling on that thread. Let's find out more. Haven't run into any deal breakers yet. In terms of the functionality, and again, we'll compare this side by side in a second, but a lot of the same things that we just saw in the prior slide. The focus is on part creation using basic features, um, both sketch features, applied features, sketching relationships, all of these things that you would expect an associate to be able to do. Um, assembly creation. This will become important. Assembly creation using standard mates. So you're not going to get any fancy, gear mates or anything no, just standard mates, as well as knowledge of mass properties. And importantly, and these are my words, I didn't copy these from anywhere. It's also my emphasis, knowledge of 2D drawing views and annotations. So clearly, if that had said that you need to be able to create brand new drawings in order to achieve the CSWA certification, would probably hit a pretty immediate roadblock here. So the fact that this is presented in a slightly different way, the way that you're assessed on your knowledge of drawings is not quite build a drawing and tell me something about it. It works a little different. So we'll get into those details. Again, something to keep our eye on, but not necessarily a roadblock in terms of moving forward. Lastly, I'll mention that the one additional component that we should keep in mind is that the way that the CSWA testing experience works, for those of you that may not have seen it, you are challenged to create models, part models, assemblies, and the way that you're assessed on whether or not you did that correctly is to ask you for information about the end result. Okay, so again, clearly, if you were asked for very specific information about what your feature manager tree looks like, or something that's very, very tied to the SOLIDWORKS user experience, we probably couldn't get too far with another CAD platform, even if it is xDesign. So that again, it keeps the door open for us to continue investigating. Here's a compatibility check. I listed things out differently, but you can see here those two things do relate. The right side is looking a little heavier because those ellipses on the left, yeah, they pack a lot in there. But there's a pretty direct correlation between that functionality. Assemblies, the idea that you can create assemblies and use standard mates, both the requirements and the capabilities on xDesign match up pretty well. Mass properties we've talked about, those are a direct correlation. So what we're left with is this last piece, which is this knowledge of 2D drawing views and annotations. So what to do about that? Well, let's talk about that a little bit. In order to develop knowledge of 2D drawing views and annotations, very importantly, the CSWA will challenge you in two ways. It will directly test your knowledge. Do you know what a section view is? Do you know what a detail view is? Those are the types of questions, or among the type of questions that you're going to see. You'll see them in some of the practice exams. You can get those right off of SOLIDWORKS' certification site. So you can get a sense for what those questions look like. You're also going to get diagrams like this 3-view projection that I have here with an isometric view. You're also going to be given this as the source, or the instructions, if you will, to go and build a model that you'll later be interrogated about. So it's not necessarily that you have to be able to create this drawing, but you certainly need to know how it works. You need to know how to interpret these annotations, angles, witness lines, and breakout views, anything that might help you, convey the design intent of a model. You need to be able to interpret that. And so those are the two ways that your knowledge of 2D drawings are going to be interrogated. This particular model here is from a Solid Professor practice exercise, so I just grabbed a screenshot of that. Okay, so continuing on, we still have that gap, so how are we going to achieve that? I will say, coming from Solid Professor, obviously, we do curriculum, we do training for SOLIDWORKS and other software. When you go through the Solid Professor curriculum, we have a curriculum that is called Beginner to Certification. And the intent of that is for it to be used in a class environment. It'll take you from being a complete novice to being able to take the CSWA exam and pass it. So it's broken up in such a way that it covers all of the requirements that we've talked about. It goes beyond what the requirements of the test are. We do get you into drawings. We get you creating 2D drawings. We talk about how to create those drawing views. We very much focus on that in the curriculum. We do so because we feel, and certainly you who use our software, our solution, feel that it's a critical component. If you're going to teach somebody CAD, you're going to teach somebody engineering design, engineering graphics, that they be able to put a 2D drawing together and understand how it works. So it's in the curriculum. But again, the demands of the CSWA aren't that. You won't have to execute the mechanics of creating a drawing. You will have to understand it. So there are ways through things like studying spatial visualization just on its own. We have content on it. There's lots of, I can still remember back to my first drafting class, the glass box talk that we all get to understand, a third angle projection, unfolding the box, all that good stuff. That level of conceptual understanding gets you a lot of the way towards being able to succeed on the CSWA. And of course, beyond that, some engineering graphics, sprinkled in for good measure so that you understand the annotations components that go along with that. So there is a need for this in order to prepare for the CSWA. It doesn't necessarily have to be creating those drawings again. I keep stressing that, but that is the one thing that most people, when they look at xDesign, it comes up very often that it doesn't have that drawing element. So I just want to make that clear that you're going to have to supplement somehow to get that experience and that understanding to your students. Okay, so based on all of that, I set out to maybe do a little experiment. This was several months ago. I thought, okay, by the time fall rolls around, we need to have some answers. So let me get to work on testing some type of a hypothesis. And what I landed on was just this question here: is it possible for a student to pass the CSWA exam having prepared with xDesign rather than SOLIDWORKS? So hence the talk and hence the case study that I went through. It's hard to find students right now to do anything. They're all at home, as they should be. So there weren't classes that I could go to and get anywhere near something scientific. So I had to pivot a little bit. I restated my question as, is it possible for my kids to do what I stated before? I have access to them. They're quarantined here. They have access to a computer here. So they had really no excuse to say no to dad. So they were good sports about it. So let me walk you through kind of what we did. We agreed that we would go through this process. I laid it out. They didn't push back too hard. So we agreed that they were going to spend time over a 3-week period going through the Solid Professor SolidWorks beginner certification course, which is kind of weird. I saw an opportunity here to achieve two things. One, to understand, xDesign's applicability towards the CSWA, but also at Solid Professor, we're listening to you and wondering, okay, what content do you need from us? And at least a good portion of you have raised your hand that at least you're considering, if not committing, to shifting over to xDesign. So for us, we need to have something for you. And so why not figure out here, what gaps exist between our current SolidWorks-based curriculum and what we need to produce for xDesign. And so, we'll go through some of these specifics here. What they were asked to do is to go through the entire course. And I did want them to have a resource. When we put Solid Professor in the class, we don't put it in the class and just let it sit there. Obviously there is a teacher that's going to be able to answer questions. For my children especially, they don't go to an engineering type program at their school. They've had some STEM classes. My daughter actually had some training in a STEM class that exposed her to some Revit design. So that was the extent of her technical background when it comes to modeling. My son hadn't had any at all. And so you can imagine that terms like fillets, draft, all these different things that I didn't think twice about might be a little bit of a challenge for them. So when those types of questions came up, I was there to, get them unstuck on the language and things like that. But otherwise they were on their own. Also, I asked them to keep a log, and this was more the self-serving part from a kind of product research perspective. Whenever they were going through a lesson that required them to follow along, remember they're watching SolidWorks lessons, but they're following along in xDesign. So let me know, write it down, keep a log, and let me know, yes, I was able to follow that lesson, or no, that does not work at all, or just, help me identify where these gaps are. Again, slightly tangential goal, but one that I thought was very useful for me and for the team at Solid Professor. Post this 3-week period of kind of going intensively through the curriculum, and by the way, the 3-week, 2-week split here, totally arbitrary. That's the amount of time we had before presentation day. So not necessarily the ideal time period. It was a lot of content they had to go through. But in the final 2 weeks, I did want to give them an opportunity just to continue to get more familiar with the tool, get some practical experience. The curriculum, does put them through practice exercises and miniature little projects, but nothing like just turning them loose, play with that for a while, get more familiar with it, and then we'll talk about taking the test. And then one additional thing, I wanted this to be a legitimate testing environment. So you, in the opening session, heard Marie Blanchard talk about this change that's been made to the policies where a parent can take on the responsibility of being the proctor. I'm not sure of all the details if I've got them all right, but that's the idea. So I didn't know about that program, but it gives me some comfort in knowing that as long as we're willing to sign the proper form, we are trusted to proctor our children. And I did. I oversaw their test taking experience, but yeah, they couldn't go back to Solid Professor. They couldn't go on the internet. They had to just do the test. So fun stuff for summer break. So let me shift over to some findings. I wanted to share this. This is the result of that log that they kept for me. You can't read the fine print, so it's in large print over on the left. The entire curriculum is comprised of 179 discrete lessons, and those could be practice exercises, it could be short video lessons, they could be guided exercises where they follow along. So there's a variety of different types of lessons. I didn't put a complete breakdown, didn't get too granular, but I did find it encouraging that after they'd spent that time going through the curriculum, there were very few, less than 10% of the lessons where they just felt like, okay, I can't follow along. This just does not apply. It doesn't translate. I don't know what to do here. They still watched the lesson, but they didn't. They weren't able to follow along. Most of those misalignments or where they couldn't follow along were tools that just fundamentally worked a little bit different, or different enough that they were tripped up and then just decided, okay, I'm just going to put here that I can't follow along. The trim tool is an example of one that was that way for them. I'm going to walk you through a series of slides here that are some of the feedback I got from them. It was interesting. Again, novices. And so when I asked them questions, did a little mini interviews with them, I just kind of wrote down what they were sharing. And then I kind of try and gather things together that seemed to be coherent. So in terms of the user interface, they all said that the major parts, right? So there was a familiarity between what they were watching in the video and what they were seeing live in front of them in xDesign. The work area, the idea that there's a tree that's got some sketches and features on the left-hand side. It might have a different name, but there it is. It looks familiar. The one thing they definitely pointed out is, okay, the command manager is in the videos is on the top for SolidWorks. And of course, with xDesign, it's at the bottom. But once you make that mental connection, that mental map is drawn, it was no big deal at all. The functionality is the same. It's just mirrored down to the bottom. So they didn't struggle with that. The icons, importantly, were very recognizable. That was kind of a key because obviously very visual interaction with something like a 3D modeler. So you want to make sure that familiar icon is going to look at least very, very similar so that you can map that knowledge over. View manipulation was really important. Is a part going to rotate the same way as I expected, as I'm seeing on the videos? And that seemed to carry over very well. They did point out that some materials were missing in the library. So some of the exercises that they went through in our curriculum, because it is specifically CSWA prep curriculum, there are a lot of sample tests and sample exercises that try and kind of drive home the principles of what you're going to see in the exam itself. Among those would be the ability to measure things, to get mass properties. And so when you're going to be doing that, you have to define some materials. And it just so happened that some of the materials that we had to find in our samples, in the Solid Professor examples, they weren't available in the library. So they pointed that out, noted it, and we went on from there. assemblies. So this is where things really started to feel different for them. So assemblies definitely work differently. Um, work differently in the sense that for those that haven't seen or played with xDesign at all, there is no discrete assembly environment. You can bring multiple components in. You can work on the component in isolation, so you can edit it as you would in a part file in SOLIDWORKS, but you can also bring another component right along with it, and you are now creating an assembly. You can then use mates just like you would in the assembly environment. So the experience is really quite different. What they're watching on screen in SOLIDWORKS just wasn't quite mapping to the way that it worked in xDesign. The mates were similar, just to underscore that. So the idea that they had to learn a whole new language or a whole new way to think about how to relate components together, that wasn't the case. It was more the case that the mechanics, the things that you only gain from playing around with a piece of software, like tiling windows in SOLIDWORKS is sometimes helpful, or the way you introduce a new component. There's obviously a few steps that you follow that kind of become your go-to method of doing it. I know that's the way it is for me. And so here in xDesign, they struggled a bit. And also something made its first appearance, a challenge that we didn't expect, or at least I didn't think about ahead of time. The curriculum they're going through, which is targeted towards SOLIDWORKS, it provides you a lot of sample parts that you can download so that you can then go and build assemblies. So we had to deal with that. How do I get that downloaded stuff into xDesign so I can even play with it a little bit and try and build an assembly? So I guess in a nutshell, file management just there wasn't enough of a parallel. It was clear to me, looking at it from the curriculum side, that we would need some way of bridging that. Let me take a quick look at the chat just to make sure y'all are still with me. All right, cool. Let's see. So let's talk a little bit about, so we were able to import some files into xDesign directly from SOLIDWORKS. It opens up SLDPRT files. If you have assemblies, it even opens assemblies up. They have to be pre-built. It has to be an assembly file. But we didn't hit a wall as much as we hit a shortcoming in the curriculum they had access to, which I furiously made notes about, and our internal development team, who is working on xDesign and other content, noted those things to make sure that we bridge those gaps. And then there was this, what ultimately became the unexpected twist in this. This was not planned. They got to the point where they were done with the curriculum and they were ready to proceed with at least committing to a day when we were going to take the test. And they still had that 2-week window, which we had agreed initially was going to be their play around with something time. And they both spoke up that they were concerned because in the CSWA prep material that they saw, they knew they would be asked to build assemblies. They knew they would be provided parts that they would have to download and then put together following very specific instructions. They weren't concerned about putting the parts together. They were concerned about how are we going to get those parts that are SOLIDWORKS parts into xDesign while being under a time crunch, because of course the CSWA is timed. So they were really nervous about that, which I thought was, it gave me a pretty good feeling that they understood what they were doing, because they were able to see that obstacle that was lying ahead. They did also raise the concern about materials, which I talked about earlier. What if the test asks us to use a material that's not available? How will we deal with that? And also because the material is lacking, the training material is lacking xDesign, assembly methodologies, and so forth. They were just concerned even in just how do I start an assembly from scratch? How do I do that? So these were all their concerns, and what they proposed was, why can't we just take the test in SOLIDWORKS, since it's a SOLIDWORKS test? I wrestled with that for sure, because the whole point of this is, can I get a CSWA certification with xDesign? That's kind of what I'm after. Ultimately, they felt really strongly about it. I thought that it posed this really interesting additional experiment of, they've just spent this whole time learning on xDesign, watching SOLIDWORKS videos. It's kind of a strange experience they went through, that I put them through. I wonder if when they crack open SOLIDWORKS, they'll be able to use it, because they've never, ever, ever used SOLIDWORKS. So I know that we're mostly concerned about going from SOLIDWORKS to xDesign is kind of the way it goes, and we talk a lot about how the skills transfer really nicely. Here I had the exact opposite situation, so I wanted to see that play out to see how it went. And we'll take a look at some of those results. Oh, results. There they are. So yeah, here are my test subjects. These are my kids. This past weekend, so just a few days ago, they took the CSWA, the mechanical design CSWA. They took it on SolidWorks. They passed the test. I obviously was proctoring, so I was also observing and just taking some notes on kind of how the experience went for them. And I'll share some of that here in a sec. Of course, there's the fun fact that it's kind of a really cool thing. So Matteo, the tall one, he was born when Solid Professor was born. So he's as old as Solid Professor. That's always a really cool fun fact that I like to share with people. Okay, so some of the conclusions from the overall experience. My case study, my experiment, obviously, I was in a couple of talks earlier today. The academic rigor behind the research that's being done by your peers, by those participants and speakers today is kind of mind-blowing. But that's not what I could do. That's not what I had available to me. This was kind of experimenting on the front lines, if you will, without any control groups or anything else. But the case study was a little sloppy. We didn't, foresee some of the obvious challenges that in hindsight we probably should have. Also, had they not passed, I would not have been surprised because, we didn't really put xDesign curriculum in front of them. I was really trying to put a square peg in a round hole. I think that it absolutely would make sense for them to have access to xDesign training content. I forced them to go down the SolidWorks side just so that I could gain some information as well. But that was just unnecessarily taxing and an easy thing to fix by just tuning them into a curriculum that's purpose-built for xDesign. So that should not be a problem. And that's what we're doing. Solid Professor's creating some of that content, which you can also find on my SolidWorks. There's content there. If you're tuned into the SolidWorks education blog, there's a lot of great resources. There are many great resources out there that you can tap into to find more and more of that. Surprisingly, the 2D drawing not surprisingly, the 2D drawing portion of the exam was completed with ease. We again do cover that in the curriculum, so they understood exactly, what kind of view is this? How is it generated? What are the annotations that denote, say, a detail view? What does a section view look like, etc. That was not a problem at all. And mind you, at this stage, they had not completed a single drawing, for what that's worth. So, that's how that played out. They did struggle more with interpreting 2D drawings. So not the exact questions that were explicitly challenging their knowledge of what a drawing view is or what a certain drawing view is called, but more build this model. Here are some orthographic projections, maybe some detail views that give you all of the information, build a part. And there were many times when they were sitting there and I was watching them just kind of looking at the sketch, trying to figure out why something was still blue, undefined, and not being able to piece together kind of the information that was coming off that drawing. They struggled through it. They made their way through and were able to get past it. But I definitely saw that it would have been very helpful for them to have gone through that experience for sure. Let's see. Yeah, let's continue on the assembly side. So assemblies, interestingly enough, it wasn't drawings, which is where initially the gap seemed to exist. It was actually in assemblies where we ran into a problem. And again, not a problem of capability in the software, not a problem in the kids' ability to understand the concepts. I think it was all there. Simply that we didn't have purpose-built curriculum that would show them how to do something like build an assembly in xDesign. Of course, if this was something that, Mike or anybody at SolidWorks was going to get behind to actually maybe shift the perspective a little bit on the CSWA, and instead of seeing it as a SolidWorks test, see it as like a basics of parametric 3D modeling certification. It's a perspective shift, but if that existed, maybe the data sets could be made available natively in xDesign, and then we would not have this problem at all. So that was kind of a problem of our own doing and not having data sets and not having instruction tailor-made for xDesign. And then the last point, which I didn't detail very much, and it's interesting that I should have, but the sketching and the part modeling, you could swap one out for the other mid-part design and they don't blink. They don't have any issues with it at all. So that's an important point because I think that there's a lot of value to being able to get very good at drawings and very good at creating parts, both basic, kind of intermediate, and even some advanced parts, all within their wheelhouse now. Again, no prior CAD, and they can look at a fairly prismatic part and kind of give me a little mental roadmap of how would you build that, and they can answer that pretty well, which I thought was fantastic. So really, really strong transfer of skills there. So to summarize, the way I see this today, again, my perspective in what is anything even close to a scientific study here, but my observation, knowing them, knowing how they went through it, I would say to kind of go full circle, and if I'm in a meeting with one of our instructors and they're finding themselves trying to figure out what they're going to do, I think if you have access to xDesign, or if you can get access to xDesign, again, I don't have all the details. We'll talk to SolidWorks after to find out how that all works. But if you have access to xDesign and you want to get your kids going, especially as we kick off the school year in remote or distance learning, time spent on xDesign, learning how to create prismatic parts, drawings, dimensions, design intent, super important. Time spent doing that in xDesign is absolutely not wasted, in my observation, when it comes to preparation for the CSWA. It is super transferable and gets you a lot of the way there. I do think that it is necessary to work some kind of spatial visualization into your curriculum that teaches the 2D concepts, the drawing concepts. That is absolutely necessary. You really can't succeed and pass the test without having a strong understanding, not even just a cursory understanding. It's not sufficient to do flashcards and say, what kind of view is this? I mean, you really have to dive into a number of 2D drawings and try to convert those into parts. Like, that is just a skill that you need. And in order to be able to do that without understanding a 2D drawing, its nomenclature, its annotations, is just going to be super, super, super difficult. Definitely the part that I could struggled with the most during the CSWA. I do think that as long as the CSWA experience is going to be driven by the assembly portion of it is going to be driven by putting SolidWorks parts together, I just today don't see that we can not have some assembly component that is done on SolidWorks. I just feel like that's a bridge too far right now. Again, native data sets would change that for me. Purpose-built curriculum would change that for me. I think it's totally doable. It's not a complexity thing, and it's not a capacity thing on the learner side. It's just the testing environment itself is very much married, as you would expect. It's called a CSWA, so SolidWorks features prominently, and that's just the way it is. So keep that in mind, that is something that that needs to be addressed. And then finally, at least the experience that not only I noticed with our kids, but the reason that many of you who use our products, I think one of the big benefits is the actual CSWA prep course. And, whether it's Solid Professor, whether it's other elements, I think that, as with all certifications, all types of assessments, it's very important that you get as much practice in the environment that you're going to be experiencing on test day. And so to that end, I think, if I'm recalling correctly, a full half of our curriculum, those 179 lessons, roughly half are devoted to the test-taking experience. And I think that's super, super valuable. The kids had access to that, and I think that made a big difference. So those are my findings. That was my experience It was just a journey for me to be able to learn and share and have better answers when these questions inevitably do come up with many of the customers that we serve. So that's how that shaped up. That is what I have in terms of a presentation. So I'm going to kill my screen share here. Actually, I'll leave it up in case you want to write down some of that information, like my contact info, etc. But I'm going to look in the panel here and see if there are any questions. You're very welcome, Shurigan. Thank you for the kind words there. And I don't know if my observation of your chats, etc. I don't know if those, if the timing is, I might be late. I think I'm on delay with you guys, so we'll see how that goes. So John asks, when will Solid Professor have xDesign material available for CSWA prep? Yeah, so we're very tuned in, or trying to be. I hope this entire event, this entire summit, and these talks really drive home the point that we're trying to be very tied in to what the needs are of those of you that we've been helping in other ways. This has emerged as something that we absolutely need to have something for you. Frankly, it wasn't in the cards at the start of the year for us to focus in this area, simply because SolidWorks was a huge component, a huge driver of those of you that implement it because you're pursuing CSWA. So xDesign just wasn't quite slotted as something that we were going to put a ton of resources into, to be frank. But that changed dramatically when we started engaging with you and we started asking you. Many of you probably received surveys from us, from Amy's team, our success team, to find out, what are you going to do? Because whatever you're going to do, we want to be able to support you. So to answer your question, we are all hands on deck. Our content team is working tirelessly to put the necessary xDesign content, so that if I was going to run this experiment with my kids again, I wouldn't put them through SolidWorks content. I would put them through xDesign content, and then they would have a much better chance at maybe using xDesign through the entire thing. We will have xDesign content available by the end of September. And if that's a little bit further out than you like for your fall sessions, keep in mind, I would strongly urge you to sprinkle in some of that spatial viz learning that is going to be necessary, and maybe some of the other elements that could buy you a little bit of time. I guarantee you that from our perspective, for those of you that do business with us, that have access to our content already, you'll see that by the end of September, you'll have full access to it. Let's see. Van asks, are your kids now interested in 3D? So a question that I asked myself is, how is it that I have a 13-year-old, a 16-year-old? I've dedicated most of my professional life to Solid Professor, and they've never been interested in 3D. It's so bizarre to me. I think they have an appreciation for it. I don't see them picking up random parts around the house and a pair of calipers and starting to build models. I haven't seen that yet. And I know that when I was bit by that bug early on, that's how I was. I was obsessed with it. So probably not an obsession just yet. Let's see. Stacy asks, mentioned your kids had 3 weeks to learn and 2 weeks to prep. How many hours do you think was spent approximately? Before I read the rest of the question, I know exactly, because I had them keep timesheets. My son was just over 30 hours total, and this is any session. So if they were just practicing, watching lessons, or going through practice exercise, they would do a stop and a start, and they kept track. My daughter was closer to 40, just over 40 hours. So she spent a little bit more time. She's also got a stack of notes that my son definitely doesn't have. So she's a note taker, and that's how she got that drilled in. So let's see. So Stacy also asks, and do you think students would be able to follow along if they're doing the same exercises a few hours a week at a time? Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, ideally, that's what I would have asked them to do. there's something about cramming, right? We all have had that experience. The real question is, after you've crammed, uh, talk to me 3 months later. How much do you remember? Maybe I should just have them take the test again, 3 months. But I believe that extending it out, having more exercises built around it, maybe tying it to the broader curriculum in the classroom. I mean, all these are ways that you can deepen that knowledge, the knowledge retention, and build more of that practical application. So absolutely, you can stretch that out a lot. Over a semester, easily. Easily. Okay. Answered that question. Fantastic. Okay, it looks like I've gone through the questions and I'm just about out of time. I'm looking in the chat just in case there's anything. Oh, John, I don't know if that question was necessarily directed at me, but I'm going to tell you because my daughter did her work entirely in a Chromebook. So as far as xDesign being Chromebook friendly, everything that she did on xDesign, she only has access to a Chromebook. So that is what she used. And Mike's been answering a bunch of questions. That's fantastic. Thanks, Mike. Fantastic. There's a question from Ed about the pricing structure for Solid Professor. There's a few folks on here from the Solid Professor team, but Ed, if you wouldn't mind, the Solid Professor booth in the exhibitor area, probably the best way to get that question answered. Answer here is kind of depends. So go there. They'll have some info for you. All right, fantastic. The Q&A thing is flashing. Oh, a couple more. Do they do all of the SP? Did they do all of the SP exercises? Asks Muffy. Yes, they did. Well, I'm sorry. One of the log they kept, one of the options was I couldn't open the files. So you can imagine that a lot of the assembly practice exercises had them open files. If it was a simple part file and they had to work on it, the import feature in xDesign was perfectly fine. So they didn't struggle there. But when it came to assembly time, we went through it once. It was tedious, and we decided not to pursue it. So they just watched those lessons. They didn't do the exercises. Let's see, Ryan. From San Diego. Inevitably, each year I'm asked for what is an affordable spec to shoot for in order to run SOLIDWORKS at a CSWA level. Any recommendations or links to good guidance? I don't know if maybe Mike would be a person to talk to about that. The reason I say that is because I don't have CAD machines. The kids don't have CAD machines. And remember, they started with xDesign, which is why my daughter was able to use a Chromebook. They finished in SOLIDWORKS. By the way they got access to the software is by buying a student edition, just like the blog post said, and getting free access to the 3D Experience platform for a year. So yeah, they made an investment. But when they switched over to SOLIDWORKS, my daughter used an old computer that we had lying around. By no means is it a CAD workstation. I couldn't quite tell you, but it's got to be at least 4 or 5 years old. Is it as performant as what I see, back in the office where our content development team has the souped up workstations? No, it's not performing that way. But for what she had to do for the test, frankly, I feel like the software moved more at her pace, as well as my son. I don't think they're trying to win speed competitions. They're just trying to get the concepts. So I didn't hear word one from them about performance at all. I just think their mind was elsewhere. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me. If you guys have any additional questions for me, my email, pedro@solidprofessor.com, is a great way to reach out. I'd be glad to learn more about how you guys will be going forward from here. Yeah, any questions at all, shoot them there. I covered all the questions here, but if you left any unasked, email them over and I'll make sure to answer them. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Bye.